sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for. When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth. In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. We are your hosts, Michael Nash and...
I am Ethan Nash. Welcome.
Let's do an icebreaker, Ethan. Let's talk for just a couple minutes. What have you done this summer that has brought you some life and some joy?
Boy, it has been a summer of that, coming off the last summer of COVID and a lot less going on. You know, to be honest, I am just doing everything in my power to get outside as much as I can. Get out in the sun, you know, whether that is in the evening time, playing spike ball or something with friends, you know, riding my bike. I went on a little solo camping trip last week. I mean, just getting outside in nature, really, and in the sun brings me a lot of joy. How about you?
Cool. Well, my summer, you may have heard the rumor that I have a grandson now.
I've heard that, yeah.
Who happens to be your nephew. I've just been a doting grandfather. It's been really fun to hang out with them. And we're 3 hours away, but we've made the trek many times and they've come this way. And that's been, you know, most of my summers, I try to do more adventure stuff and motorcycle ride or hikes. And this summer, I have not done anything like that yet. I hope to do a little bit, but it's been a summer so far of getting to know the little guy. And
yeah. He is a cutie. And yes, Grandpa Nash. Well, that was a nice icebreaker. That was lovely. It was good to think about.
Yeah. So let's set context here. We are into our second season. We have embarked on a little journey of a series, and this is the seventh and final installment of a series. You know, just to kind of catch everybody up, Ethan and I decided to review the top 15 management skills because they really matter, right? These are deliverables. These are the things that our employees really need from us in order for them to be engaged and have high morale and bring their best self to work. And it's based on a fair amount of research. And so we have spent many episodes working through those skills. And in fact, let's just take a quick pause on that. Ethan, would you mind? I know we do this every time. Folks, if you're tired of hearing this, go get yourself a cup of coffee, but just walk through the 15 management skills for us, would you?
Absolutely. I will be quick-ish about it. So the top 15 management skills. Number 1, show care and respect. The best way to create psychological safety. Number 2, advocate for your employees. You take actions to help your employees be successful. Number 3, communicate, right? Become an information curator. Number 4, involve others in decision-making. Ask for people's opinion and actually listen. Number 5, be consistent, be fair, be equitable, right? People are given equal respect, opportunity, and understanding. Number 6, give autonomy and trust. Number 7, ask for feedback. Be open to that feedback as well. You don't know what you don't know. Number 8, fix problems. One of the biggest sources of negativity in work is usually unresolved issues. So fix those problems. 9, be approachable. Effectively deal with the power differential. We've talked about that a lot on this podcast. Go back and listen to our episodes on the power differential, of course. Number 10, give recognition and thanks. It's a basic human need to be seen and appreciated. Number 11, hold employees accountable. Make sure the unhelpful behaviors are being addressed and addressed effectively. And that is an art to it. 12, be available, be responsive. Number 13, follow through and follow up. Do what you say you're going to do. Number 14, make your expectations clear. Be specific with those expectations. Lastly, 15, provide resources and training. Give your people the tools they need to be successful. And there you have it, folks, the top 15 management skills.
Dude, I have never heard those skills communicated with so much animation and enthusiasm. That was beautiful.
You got to keep our listeners listening, right? So add a little jazz to it.
That was awesome. So that was the first 5 episodes of the series, was really working through those and digging into those a little bit deeper and giving some examples and some instruction and some ideas and some creativity. And then these last 2 episodes, last time and then right now, we're talking about the context by which these show up. We're talking about the idea that these 15 skills have to be thought of by the manager as deliverables, right? They're not going to deliver themselves. They're not going to just magically show up. We have to consciously and intentionally deliver these things. And that's going to happen in 3 different contexts, right? Mm-hmm. We covered 2 of them last time. One of those was in our general availability, our open door policy, our managing by walking around. These are going to just show up as we interface with employees kind of randomly, in the sense that sort of as needed. Mm-hmm. And that's really important, right? That's that availability that we've talked, that you mentioned just a minute ago. The other context is meetings, because that first context, the availability, if we just depend on that, it's not going to meet all the needs, right? It's going to be a little more reactive. It's going to be, it's not going to be very evenly distributed. There's lots of people who won't use your open door policy when they should have. There's, it becomes less proactive, right? So we want to do the other 2 contexts. One of those is meetings. And I thought that was a really fun discussion about just lots of different ways that those 15 things can show up in our meetings. And we went through all 15 of them, I believe. Mm-hmm. So that was cool. And so today we're going to talk about the third, and I think, I don't want to say most important, but I'll say very important delivery method, which is one-on-ones. And what we're talking about here are intentional, scheduled, regular, one-on-one conversations. I'm not talking about, just real briefly, we're not talking about the random sort of run into somebody in the break room or someone use your open door policy. That's all good. It's fantastic. We're also not talking about even these sort of scheduled, maybe daily or weekly check-ins, where you just check in on how you're doing and let's look at your project and see how things are going. That's all great and needs to happen. But we're talking about something a little different than that. In fact, Ethan, let me throw that at you. How would you characterize these one-on-ones in contrast to the fact that I see my employee anyways in the break room, or we have a check-in to check in on their project? Like how would you differentiate that from what we're talking about today, these one-on-ones?
Yeah. So how would I differentiate these one-on-ones from regular check-ins, running at the water cooler and all that? Well, you said the word perfectly. These are intentional one-on-one meetings. So how I differentiate them is that these meetings are there for you to essentially build relationship and understand what you need to help them succeed, right? This is a chance for you to really dig in to those aspects of their job. And it's also, we go back to one of the 15 management skills of being fair and equitable. We've said this before, for the regular check-ins or the run-ins with people, those are going to naturally be uneven, right? You're going to run into other people more than others. So with the one-on-ones, you're making sure you're spending that dedicated time with each individual, figuring out how you can help them perform, how you can help them feel good about being in this workplace. It really is a chance for you to do an intake in a lot of ways, and also a chance for you to extend empathy towards them and to understand their job from their perspective. Yeah. So that's a lot of things. But that's how to differentiate from a simple check-in. And oftentimes these one-on-one meetings, I would say, are less, although not always, but are less about tasky stuff, and are more about them as a person. So how does that sound? Would you agree?
I love
Anything
it.
You would revise?
No, I think that's spot on. In fact, that last thing you said, I think, is pretty key. And I want to emphasize that for our listeners. It's not that you won't jump into tasks in these one-on-ones for, at times, for sure, because there's maybe a really important thing you want to talk about, or they want to talk about their project or their client or their whatever. Nothing wrong with that. But this is so much not about just tasky, check-ins. That's not what this is. And for that reason, I think that's why these get missed. I think that they don't feel as on sort of a surface level, they don't feel quite as productive. They're not necessarily solving a particular, in your face project or client problem, right? Mm-hmm. So we can not think of these as very important, but this is really where the rubber meets the road, because we've been talking about building trust and respect. We've been talking about psychological safety. We've been talking about the need for our employees to be seen and to be known and to feel cared about. This is really the way we're going to do that, among others, right? But this is really the way we're going to do that, is these consistent, regular kind of summit conversations, which means, and we'll get to this logistically here at the end today, these aren't going to be daily. These aren't going to be weekly, right? This is probably going to be something that's a little bit more periodic, like once a month or every 6 weeks or whatever. So,
and the point here, of course, is that these one-on-one meetings are the chance for you to deliver the top 15 management skills, right? Again, we put it in the context of your general availability last episode and meetings, but this is a huge area where you can really more or less do all of those top 15 management skills and make sure you're doing it on a consistent basis with each and every person.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I know, we don't mean delivering all 15 every time, of course.
Right.
But over time, right, that we now have a chance to kind of ensure that each employee is going to be receiving these 15 things from us. Which reminds me, and you and I can go back and forth on this, Keith, and there's several reasons to have these conversations. I'm going to start calling them conversations, I think, but there's so many reasons to have these regular scheduled conversations. One being what you just said, this is probably one of the best delivery methods for those 15 things, right? Consciously, intentionally delivering those 15 things. Let's maybe list a few other reasons why these conversations are so important. What else do we gain from these conversations, and maybe even what would be the cost of not having these conversations? Mm-hmm. You have a couple or one? Yeah.
So other reasons why these intentional one-on-one meetings matter. Well, let me start by just throwing out a stat. I like stats.
You're the stat man.
Research. I'm the stat man. So I was looking at some research, and the research found that 55% of highly engaged organizations said that employees are expected to have one-on-one meetings monthly or quarterly, right? And that was compared to only 22% of disengaged organizations, right? So already we're seeing that organizations that do these intentionally have more engaged workforces. And like we talk about all the time, that engagement, right? You say that's that golden egg organizations are always looking for. And I think that's the case because these are the times that you're building relationships with your employees, right? And I think having a strong relationship where an employee feels respected, listened to, that their voice matters, that's where you get at least a big portion of that engagement we're always looking for.
You just mentioned something so important by even using the word relationship, right? This is key because we're not, it's not the same thing as friendship. We're not talking about becoming friends necessarily. And that may or may not happen, but we're talking about the importance of that actual real relationship, this work relationship. And how do relationships grow, right? They grow through time together. They grow through questions and listening, and they're not magic. They don't just happen because you've hired somebody. It grows because we nurture it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, and this goes back to our top 15 management skills, this is a chance for you to get ahead of problems and fix them, right? I said earlier that a lot of these meetings are kind of like an intake. I wouldn't use that word specifically when you're setting these up, but if you don't fix problems, so again, here's what happens if you don't have these regular scheduled one-on-one meetings and you're just relying on them coming into your open door policy, or you're going to find them at the water cooler. Well, you don't hear about problems all the time because you're not asking specific questions that are targeted to figure out what issues are out there. What are they dealing with? What obstacles do they face? What roadblocks, right? And
Right.
so, I mean, to me, that's one of the biggest things out there. You're building relationship, and through building relationship, you start to develop transparency between the two of you where actual problems get talked about and addressed.
Yep.
So that's a big one right there in my mind.
Yeah, the proactiveness for sure. It evens out the playing field, right? Because not everybody will use your open door policy, or some people will be frequent flyers, and so you give time to the folks that might not demand it or even ask for it. I guess I'd also throw in that this is one of those, and this gets to one of the top 15 management skills, but you actually get to coach and in a very proactive way, right? As opposed to, hey, there's been this problem. Now we have to have a conversation, and it's going to feel, really heavy and close to maybe even discipline, or at least I'm getting called out. That's unfortunate when the only time I get with my employees is when I'm having to correct them, right? And by then it's already been a problem for a while. This is so cool when you can get ahead of stuff and catch stuff really early and inquire about what the roadblocks might be, and do some coaching ahead of time and give them some different ways of approaching a situation so they don't have to step in that, problem again. And it's just such a much better way to develop employees.
I totally agree. And I'm looking at these top 15 management skills. I'm starting to think that it might be dang impossible to be really good at delivering these top 15 management skills without a one-on-one meeting.
Ethan,
Right?
say that again. I'm writing this down.
It's going to be darn near impossible to deliver these top 15 management skills if you're not setting up intentional one-on-one conversations with everybody, regularly scheduled, right? There's going to be some of these that you could probably get away with delivering, but not to its full extent.
Yeah, folks, that was a bit of amazing wisdom from Ethan Nash, because I haven't said it that way in the workshops, but I will now start saying it that way, because I actually really, really agree with that. I'm seeing that in my own world. I mean, with the consultants that work with us, I am finding over and over again, one-on-one conversations we're having during these that would not have happened otherwise. And I would not have been able to meet their need in that way. Thank you, Ethan. That's actually brilliant.
Oh, well, thank you. Sometimes I say brilliant things.
Yeah, sometimes you do.
Not a lot, but I have my moments. Hey, can I add one more thing here? Look at top 15 management skill number 9. That's a big one. Be approachable, right? We talk about effectively dealing with the power differential. I really believe that the one-on-one meetings is a chance to not eliminate the power differential, but a chance to really make it clear to everybody that you are approachable. I don't know what other way to say it. If you're not building a relationship with your employees, that power differential is going to be exaggerated. It just will, right? Because they don't know you as well on that level, and you're not going to know them well enough, right? And so if your employees feel like you don't know them that well, there's going to be this exaggerated power differential. Part of it is just being approachable, and that can happen through these meetings.
I'd like to use that as a segue, because these one-on-one conversations can be terrible, and they can increase the power differential by the way you do, by the way you show up, and they can actually, as you said, they can actually lower the power differential and create approachability. So could we take a few minutes to talk about just some hints in how to show up in these conversations?
Hints for how to show up in these one-on-ones. Yeah, go for it. Why don't you start us off?
Well, I for one thing, I just want to ask managers to strike this sounds so obvious, but I just want to say it, right? A casual, friendly vibe, maybe go out to coffee sometimes for these, right? Or maybe sit someplace other than you, right behind your 8-foot oak desk, and them sitting in the little chair on the other side, or, location, but also just style, and shoot the breeze a bit. And, hopefully you're the kind of manager anyways who does that. Hey, how was your daughter's basketball game last Friday night? Maybe hopefully you do that anyways when you see people. But I just want to remind people that these can't feel like formal meetings with agendas and this sort of this evaluation sort of vibe to it, where I'm here to tell you how you're doing, or, we're going to do this quarterly meeting to, fill out a form together. I just want to ask everyone to think of these as, roughly monthly-ish conversations for building a relationship. So that's the one of the many things about the vibe is just approaching it with a fair amount of friendliness and casualness, but consistency, right? Casualness does not mean we just skip these randomly, because that's a problem too, right? These aren't to be, oh, I'm really busy, you're busy, let's just skip. No, these have to be important, but that doesn't mean they have to be formal.
That's a really good point. On that note, one question I've gotten from managers before in this is, say they're having this meeting monthly with their employees. How should a manager prepare for these in a sense, right? Because we're talking about these being intentional, which means you should have some intention going into them. But are there specific boxes per se that you should be checking every time, right? Like, okay, and obviously it shouldn't be this mechanical, but okay, let's focus on the relationship some. But what other things are you trying to cover in this meeting? And maybe there's not a great formula. Maybe it's just thinking about, how can I learn from my employees during this meeting in the context of what's going on in the workplace?
No, I get it.
Catch my vibe?
I do. I will answer that a little bit here in a few minutes when we start digging into some great questions to ask. But I would say if I had to create a formula, and it would be super loose, but it would be absolutely relationship building for sure, which will remind me not to just, hey, how's your 42nd Street project going? It will remind me to not just go into task mode. So I would say this is about building a relationship. I would also say it's about asking questions, which we'll get to in a few minutes, right? There's a whole variety of questions that can capture lots of the 15 management skills right there. I also think there might be a little bit of maybe if we're meeting monthly, I might want to include at least a little bit of, hey, what do you need from me? Is there anything else I can do? What are you needing? How can I help? I think that's probably a pretty good, consistent, every single time question. Asking them what they want to talk about so that we don't forget that this is a shared conversation, meaning that I need to be bringing some things to it and they are invited to bring some specific things as well. And sorry, I'm kind of droning on here, Ethan, but a little side note on that. Mistakes I've seen in these one-on-ones would be either the manager having all the agenda and not leaving any room for what the employee wants to bring to the table. But I've also seen the opposite mistakes, which is the manager just shows up every time without any intentionality. And it's always, okay, what do you want to talk about? And then, which puts the poor employee in a really awkward situation, I think. So it's that both parties coming with things to talk about. And if the employee doesn't, no harm in that, right? You have some questions you want to ask. You have some things you want to talk about. So it's a little bit more on the manager to kind of come prepared.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't think there's any harm with having a few standard questions that you ask every time. And it can even end up being, a lighthearted joke, right? Well, hey, I know this question is coming, but I got to ask again. What obstacles are you facing that's preventing you from doing your best work, right? What barriers are you facing? That is a question I like to ask during every one of my one-on-ones. And sometimes it's like you don't get an answer, right? And that's okay. But by consistently asking it, you set the vibe that you are here to remove obstacles, right? And that is certainly part of the top 15 management skills. I think it is okay to have a few of those questions that are just standard.
I really agree with that. And the other one that I've seen really often or common is, hey, what's a win from this month? Like what's a success you've experienced? What's something you're happy about, proud of? Those are examples of a certain things you'll do each time. And you just reminded me that not only are those cool because you're capturing really important information, they really do set a tone, right? It's a culture changing thing to always say something positive about your work. It's a culture changing thing to always make it clear that you're here to help them with roadblocks, right? So I really agree with you.
And I know we're kind of jumping all over the place here, but I just had another related thought. One of the biggest pushbacks that I see to one-on-ones is, of course, we have a ton of other stuff to do. I don't have time to do these. That's not to minimize the fact that you might be overloaded with work. Maybe you have way too many employees to manage. But as the old kind of cliche goes, it's pay now or pay later, right? It
Yep.
really is being proactive with each and every employee, right? And so if you brush this stuff to the side and say, I don't have time, I have other stuff I need to focus on, well, all of a sudden, those things that you were supposed to be focusing on gets really, really hard because you have a team that has all sorts of obstacles, all sorts of challenges that you didn't know were in their way. And now you're actually having to really pay the price for that down the road, right? Or, there was feedback there that would have helped you do your job better and be more effective and more efficient with all these things that you have to do, but you didn't seek that out. So yes, it is slowing down in a sense, but it will help you be more effective and really speed up later. And I fully believe that.
I can't agree more. And I would say even another version of that, Ethan, is how much time does low morale and disengagement take? Right?
Oh, tons. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking turnover and more junior high behaviors and more missed deadlines. And, I could make a huge list of the cost of disengaged employees and low morale employees, right? So yeah, one-on-ones takes time, but not having one-on-one takes more time. Absolutely takes more time.
Yeah. And what we do know is that the majority of performance issues are related to employees' environment, right? Obstacles in their environment, right? Feedback that they're not getting. And so if you want to solve the workplace, let's say, issues, it's thinking systematically and systemically and recognizing that by having these meetings, you're looking at kind of the comprehensive system of your team and figuring out what you can, tweak and adjust to make that system run at full speed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of get back to, we're talking about sort of how to show up in these meetings. Well, a couple of things. One is, if you're going to use these conversations to do any kind of correction, right? Some corrective feedback. First of all, these are great contexts for that, right? These really are the place, right? This allows you to avoid the come see me vibe. You're already seeing them on a regular basis. You can have ongoing conversations about whatever the issue is. You can follow up. You can coach. So it's a great place to have those conversations, but I just would caution managers, first of all, if you're just moving into one-on-ones and you haven't been doing them, don't use your first few for this, because that will give people the message right up front that, oh, great, these are going to be trips to the principal's office once a month. So save that for later, or have those conversations maybe separately from the one-on-ones so that they don't get kind of mixed in at first. I would also say, even as you're, once you're going and once they're sort of consistent, just make sure that your one-on-ones don't get eaten up by that kind of conversation.
Agreed.
And then questions. I want you and I to offer to our listeners some specific questions that they can ask. And we'll even offer a resource if they want to write in and ask for it. Ethan can talk about that in a few minutes. But, let's just briefly talk about asking questions in general, right? We've covered this before, so I don't want to dig into this too much. But, there's a big difference between asking something like, hey, how am I doing as a manager? Right? That's very different than, hey, can you tell me some things you'd like to see less of or more of from me as a manager? Right? You compare those two questions. The first one, how am I doing as a manager? It's not only a close-ended question, which is one of those questions that you can answer with a yes or a no or a fine. It's also a question that kind of hints that I hope it's positive, right? I mean, what do I want to hear, Ethan, when I say to you, hey, Ethan, how am I doing as your manager? What do you think I want to hear?
You obviously want to hear that you're doing awesome.
Exactly. I want awesome, right? And so it's going to be a little harder for you to answer the question if it's not awesome, if I'm, because of the power differential and the fact that I've made it obvious to you by the way I asked it. I want to hear something good, right? So, hey, what would you like to see less of or more of from me? Gives you way more permission to tell me the truth and to go where you want to go with that. Instead of, hey, how do you think staff meetings are going? You could ask, hey, what would you do differently if you were running staff meetings? Or what ideas do you have for improving staff meetings. So again, it's not a closed-ended question, and it's not a question that's fishing for a positive answer.
Yeah.
So I just want to remind the listeners that, there's a little bit of an art to asking the question. Let's start listing some great questions.
All right. Well, here are some of my favorite questions to ask. What are your favorite and least favorite parts of this job? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you wish you could do less often? Right? What do you wish you could do more often? Just so we're clear, just because you're asking these questions doesn't mean you can always do something about that. I know some managers can get scared away from asking the question, right? What do you wish you could do less often? Because what if they get an answer and they're like, I don't know how to fix that.
That's your job, man.
That is part of your job. So it can be tricky, but it doesn't mean you don't ask the question in case there is something you can do about it now or in the future.
Yeah. Can I jump in on that, Ethan?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the question itself, it's one of my favorite questions, and there's cool ways to, what are some of the things you really enjoy on your way to work? What things that make you happy about coming here? What are those things that make you feel not so excited about coming to work? What's working here for you? What's not? And to emphasize what you just said, people know you're not magic, and they know you're not Santa, and they know that you're not going to be able to give them everything they want. But I remember talking to a manager years ago, and he said, I never ask those kinds of questions because I will not be able to give them what they want. And what that's costing him is, first of all, his people not believing he actually cares. It's costing him just knowing his people, the possibility of being able to mitigate in some ways in the future, and kind of help things be easier for the employee. So I'm just emphasizing what you said. It's good stuff.
What questions do you have that you like to ask?
Ones I like a lot is, I already kind of referred to this, but it's the asking for feedback question. So this is how I could improve staff meetings. I'll just kind of rattle off a few here. Again, what would you like to see more of or less of from me as a manager? How can I better support you next time in this kind of a project? What would you have liked to have seen me do differently in supporting you through this last project or whatever it was we're talking about? What feedback do you have about how I can improve our work group's relationship with that other work group, right? We know there's some issues here. What could I do? What would you like to see me do? What feedback might you have for upper management? And that's a tricky one, because you want to make sure upper management actually wants you to ask that question, and it's open to hearing the answer. But how could I or we improve communication around here? What would you like to see us do differently so that everybody's on the same page? I could go on, and I won't, but that genre of questions where you're really asking them their thoughts, and you are writing down their answers on your notepad, and you're showing them that their input actually matters. And then, if possible, circling back later.
Just to play the devil's advocate here, and I think this is a legitimate concern. Let's call it information overload for the manager. Let's say, for instance, you have 5 direct reports, and you're doing a one-on-one monthly, and you're spending an hour with them or so, and you're asking a lot of really good questions, having a lot of really good conversations. Well, over time, you're taking in a lot of data, a lot of information from your employees. That could be overwhelming. And I could see that could actually cause low morale for the manager, thinking, wow, there are all these things that my employees want or would like to see different. I feel like I am over my head, being able to do anything about this stuff. So when you're coaching managers, how do you kind of get them to separate the idea of asking really great questions to get really good information and recognizing the fact that you're going to get a lot of information that you can't do anything about?
Yeah, I totally get that question. And I think the way around that is the manager is going to set the tone, right? You're going to set the tone in general. You're not the only one setting the tone. The employees are going to contribute to that. But you could actually create a dynamic between you and your employees where they're kind of overly dependent and constantly giving you feedback and constantly criticizing things and always asking for change. And when you see, I've got 6 employees and they're all kind of behaving that way, that's not a coincidence, right? I didn't just happen to get 6 needy employees. I created that somehow, or at least co-created it. And I've seen that happen. And so I put that back on coaching managers. For example, let's say I want to dig into, I'll just pick meetings. I might say to my group together in a group meeting or through an email, I might say, hey, during our next round of one-on-ones, hey, I want to get some feedback about meetings. Here's what I want to ask you. What would you like to see me do to improve them? What's working for you? Whatever. You put these questions out. So the benefit of that is several things. One is it helps your processors process. And you remember that from behavior styles, right? People who, if you would have asked them point blank in the conversation, they wouldn't have had anything to say until tonight. Mm-hmm. And then they have all sorts of cool things to say to you. So it helps the processors process. But it also, getting to your point, it makes your job of asking for feedback feel very intentional and very focused. And it's one thing, right? You're not asking them about 5 other things that month, right? You're asking them one thing. And they are being invited to give feedback about that. And there's a sense that you're sort of the gatekeeper of this asking for feedback thing, right? And that doesn't mean they won't have other times that they voluntarily come to you with concerns or feedback, which is great. You want that, right? But I think the best way to control the flow of this, so it's not overwhelming, is that you just show up very intentionally about this. And so I wouldn't, in one-on-one, I wouldn't say, what would you like to see less of from me? And how could I improve staff meetings? And how could I improve communication? And what do you want for, I just wouldn't pepper them with all of that. I would give these to them on a very, reasonable cadence. So I think if you show up more measured and with a cadence that makes sense, I think people will follow and not become entitled, right? Here's my demand list for this month.
So it sounds like you're talking about, like, obviously we're throwing out a lot of different questions you could ask, but what you're talking about is being pretty focused in each one of these one-on-ones. Like you might have maybe even just one big question that you're addressing. You also said something there that stood out to me about helping people prepare in advance for what you want to talk about with them, and also helping them understand the rationale for that. If I'm asking a question, how do you like to be recognized? But to back that up with, maybe there's a chance to show some humility there. Hey, I know I haven't been great at showing recognition, or I've gotten feedback that the way I show recognition works for some people and other people don't really like that. And so I'm going to have a one-on-one with everybody and talk about, maybe how they prefer to receive recognition. So now you have the context and the rationale for the question you're asking, and it's easier for people to put that in the context that they need to answer that question.
I think both points are correct. Your first point was we're not going to try to cover all 15 management skills with 15 different questions, other than maybe those standing regular questions, like what's the success from last month, and what, and maybe ending the meeting or the last part of the meeting is what can I do for you, or what do you need from me to help you with roadblocks. So those might, like you said, those might be standard. But you might have just one more thing that you bring to the table that month. And so yes, the first part of your paraphrase is, maybe just one more thing. And then the second thing, the rationale, I think both points are accurate. A couple more questions. The idea of the classic, where do you want to be? What would you like your career path to look like? I think one of the coolest things is when a manager hears that an employee has some desire to do something else someday in that company or even outside that company, right? That they kind of commit to helping them get there. I think that's a really selfless, it shows caring. It shows I'm advocating for my employee.
Let me try taking this from a slightly different angle. A lot of our listeners, probably managers, most managers have managers themselves, right? What also might be considered, if you're on the receiving end, for instance, of these one-on-ones, right? Your manager is bringing you in for a one-on-one. There might actually be some good questions that you can ask them as well. The benefit of asking these questions is you start to show your manager that these are the type of things that might be helpful for them to cover with people, right? Mm-hmm. So, for instance, what if you ask the question, hey, I'm just curious, what new skills would you like to see me develop, right? That could be a question a manager could ask their direct report. And that could also be a question the direct report could ask their manager. How about what kind of professional development do you think would be most beneficial at this point in my career? Or what projects or tasks do you see coming down the pipeline that might be best aligned with my strengths? So I just wanted to give a quick nudge to the fact that you can actually help your managers have better one-on-ones by flipping the script a little bit and starting to ask them intentional questions.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Hey, here's another one, which almost all of these actually, now that you mentioned, Ethan, work both ways, right? So here's the project or whatever we've just finished, right? Our group, or I have just finished whatever. I might ask my boss, hey, let's debrief this experience, this last 6 months of time we spent on this project. What do you think I did well? What would you have liked me to have done differently? What would you like to see me learn from this process or this project we just completed? That's a great question to ask your boss. And it's a perfect question for the boss to have asked the employee, right? What did you learn from this experience? What would you have liked more of from me or less of from me?
So those are a lot of really good questions. That's a starting point. There are plenty more you could ask. If you're interested, we have a free resource that we could email to you. It is a giant ebook of great one-on-one questions to ask. They're kind of sectioned off in different categories. If you'd be interested in seeing that as a tool to help facilitate those conversations, shoot us an email at contact@nashconsulting.com, and we'd be happy to send you over that resource. So one-on-ones, like we said, it is the way to actually make sure you're doing these top 15 management skills. And it might be impossible to do them consistently and fairly without having these one-on-one meetings, right? This is a chance for you to show caring and respect, right? This is a chance where you get to create psychological safety by continuing to reiterate the message. I am in your corner, right? It's safe for us to discuss whatever you want to talk about, right? These are your chance to, of course, communicate. That's obvious. This is your chance to figure out how you might be able to give people more autonomy, right? Mm-hmm. Understanding what do they think of when they think of autonomy? What parts of their job would they like to have more autonomy over? This is obviously a chance for you to fix problems. And you're not going to be able to fix all the problems unless you ask questions about obstacles.
Yeah. Hold on. You're halfway there. Let me add a few more. A time to give recognition and praise, right? Mm-hmm. A time to provide some corrective feedback. A time to ask a style 3 decision question, right? Like, I'd like to get your opinion on this before I decide. Checking in with them on training and resources. Literally, as Ethan, you said earlier, this is the way to deliver these 15 things. And so, if our listeners are a little bit stuck on, well, I don't know what to ask about, get the ebook from us, but also look at the 15 management skills. I bet you every one of those 15 skills will prompt some question or conversation for you.
I love it. I mean, I do really like that suggestion of having these top 15 skills as North Star to make sure you're covering these, throughout the year, throughout the quarter.
Ethan, can we just take a couple minutes and talk about the nitty-gritty of logistics and some of the roadblocks here?
Please.
How do you make this happen, and how often, et cetera? You've heard us say monthly as sort of an ideal. I really like monthly. I think that's a really good cadence. And I've talked to a couple others that kind of feel this way too. For this kind of conversation, you don't really want to go more than monthly because it starts to degenerate into sort of tasky, let's check on the project kind of things. And here's what I mean by that. If you already, for example, have a weekly check-in, fantastic. Keep doing that. And if it's working for you, awesome. I would recommend, and I've seen lots of managers do this, just take 1 out of 4 of those every month and transform it a little bit, right? So keep doing your weekly check-ins, but every 4th one, maybe add a little time to it and maybe go somewhere else, possibly. That's optional. But make sure you then get past the normal, check-in type conversation and bring in some of these other questions, open it up to some more possibilities. And so the monthly cadence for this, I think, is really good. My range is kind of monthly to about every other month. If you have lots of employees, you've got 10 employees and you just know it's not going to happen monthly, you might want to go to every 6 weeks, or you might want to go to every 8 weeks. I would caution against going any farther out than that, because once it starts feeling like a quarterly thing, it just starts to feel more formal. It's really hard to avoid that.
Good. Keep going.
Yeah.
What other stuff do you have?
Virtual, in person, it doesn't matter. These are built for a Teams or a Zoom call, right? I mean, this can be done anywhere. This can be done on the computer. This can be done in person. I think occasionally getting out and maybe going for a walk in the nice weather and having this conversation, or going over to the coffee shop. If you, again, on that one, make sure the employee is comfortable with that and feels like it's private enough, and that it's not weird that their boss is asking them out or something, right? So you got to watch for some of those nuances, but finding a more casual location. So just some logistical stuff to throw in there before we move on. So
that's really good stuff. And now let me add just a couple more. 2 important pillars to keep in mind when you're having these intentionally scheduled one-on-one meetings: listening and empathy. So when you're having these one-on-one meetings, if you want to maximize them and get the most out of them, practice really excellent listening skills, right? And we have episodes on that, but that is everything from obviously not being distracted, not being on your computer doing other things during these meetings, to, little things like paraphrasing. But then the empathy comes in, just really trying to understand that employee's situation, perspective from their shoes.
Oh, dude, that's, again, you're rocking it today. Those aren't logistics, but let's put those right back into our previous conversation about the tone, the mood, the vibe. I mean, I'm almost surprised that I forgot to talk about that, right? I mean, are you listening in a way where they really feel heard? They really feel heard. So again, go back to our episodes on that. That's a skill that every single manager has to continue to develop. And then the empathy, right? That's the best way to connect. So I'm glad you said that. In fact, that's probably a good way to wrap up, I think.
I think that is also a great place to wrap up. And not only are we wrapping up this episode, we're wrapping up our season 2 kickoff series, right? Woo-hoo! That was 7 episodes. If you've made it this far, thanks for following along. We're excited for what's yet to come in season 2. It's going to be a continuous fun ride.
It's going to be just a joyride.
It will be a joyride. All right, everybody. As always, thanks for listening in. Please share this show with people that might also find value in it. And if you really want to go out of your way to support us, you could go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. So besides that, goodbye, everybody.
Yeah. Bye.